Right, let's have a look. We're just going to have a look at the concept of Cherubim found within the Talmud and then get to the accusation and look at a few numbers beside. Continuing its focus on the cherubs, the Gemara asks, how were the cherubs standing? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar disagree about this. One says their faces are turned to one another, so these are the Cherubim on the Holy Ark, the Ark of the Covenant. And one says their faces were turned towards the house, i.e. the sanctuary. The Gemara says, but according to the one who says that their faces were turned toward the other, isn't it written and their faces were toward the house? That's from 2 Chronicles 3:13. How does he explain the meaning of this verse? The Gemara answers, this is not difficult, as their faces miraculously changed directions in reflection of the Jewish people's relationship to God. Here, when it states that the cherubs faced each other, it was when the Jewish people do the will of God. There, the verse that describes that the cherubs faced the sanctuary and not towards each other was when the Jewish people did not do the will of God. So that's from Bava Batra 99a, found in the Talmud. Okay, you just need to understand this concept of the cherubim facing one another and turned away from each other, because it comes up later. It says, Rabbi Katina said, whenever Israel came up to the festival, the curtain of the Beis Hamikdash, the holy temple, would be removed, and the cherubim, would be shown to them, and their bodies would be intertwined with one another. They would thus be addressed, look, you are beloved before God as the love between man and woman. That's from Yoma 54a. That's in the Talmud. Okay. Look, you are beloved before God as the love between man and woman. So this is indicated, the two cherubim in this statement indicate the love between God and Israel, his wife. Okay, the king and his wife. Resh Lakish said, now this is where we get the accusation. And we'll see why. And we were going to have a look at the actual images to be found from the Temple Institute regarding the whole appearance of the cherubim in the Beis Hamikdash, Beis Hamikdash in the temple. The temple. Reish Lakish said, when Gentiles destroyed the second temple and entered the sanctuary, they saw these drawings of cherubs clinging to one another. They peeled them from the wall, took them out to the market, and said, the Jews, whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, due to their great fear of God, should they be occupied with such matters, making images of this kind? They immediately debased and destroyed them, as it is said, all who honoured her debase her, because they have seen her nakedness. That's Lamentations 1:8. Yoma 54a. What is it actually talking about then? Because it's there's some mysterious stuff going on in there, but there's clearly an accusation that the Jews have been occupied with making images, which is tantamount to idol worship. And you can go study this. Why is the making of cherubim not in contradiction to the commandment not to make any images of any kind? Okay, it's a good question. When we go and have a look at the level of the way that these images were used within the Beis Hamikdash, you can start to understand why they were accused of idol worship. And then also there's another saying that there's always an element of truth within even a false accusation. So you got to bear that in mind. Even though they were falsely accused of worshipping images and making images and worshipping them to a certain degree, being occupied with such matters, what's the truth in that then? Because it was also this was also highlighted in the Quran, as we will see shortly. So with this notion, we shall understand what the students of Rav Dov Ber asked their Rebbe about the enemies who found the cherubim on the day in an embrace, which was only for the time when Israel was doing Hashem's will. He answered them that one must remember his wife when he's going on the road. That's from Yevamos 62, Shechinta Begluta. which means, you know, remembering your wife. It's a concept, Shechinta B'Galuta. It's like the Holy Shekinah going into Galut, which is exile. And it says, and understand this. Okay, so what's the question there then? So if, for example, the Cherubim were in an embrace and entwined because Israel did the will of God, why at the day of exile were they entwined when they should have been facing the sanctuary walls, as it's pointed out up here? You know, because they weren't doing the will of God, i.e. they were sent into exile. And it's this concept here. And he answered them that one must remember his wife when he is going on the road. So his wife was going out. He was sending his wife out, Bnei Israel, into exile. And he must remember his wife. Okay, so it says, and understand this. Right? So we've got here, Shechinta Begaluta, this is in Aramaic, going on the road, the Shekinah going down into exile. It comes to 1,223 plus 125, together they come to 1,348. It's this number that we're going to be looking at though. He made my feet as hinds' feet. So that has got a regular and ordinal that come to 1,223. This is appellation for Mashiach ben Yosef. Okay. And it's also the Mispah Gadol and the Mispah Gadol ordinal of the King of Israel. So we've already had this powerful connection once. The King of Israel, okay, who's ultimately the Mashiach, but he's also connected to the concept of the Shekinah, the Holy Shekinah, the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, the Malkuth. He is King of the kingdom on earth. 1,223, so it's connected to all these. Concept of Mashiach ben Yosef and the Shekinah going out into exile. Both concepts of Mashiach are in exile. Moshe is in exile, in Erev exile, talk about it a lot. Yeshua is in Edomite exile. Mashiach ben Dawid is probably in Yishmaelite exile. All need redeeming, all concepts of Mashiach need redeeming. And then we've got this concept, which is accounted him as plagued, smitten by God and oppressed, which comes to 2,446 when the He is filled with an Aleph and the Vav is filled with a Vav. 2 times 1,223, so connected to all this. This is connected to Yeshua Notzri. Okay, he's the one that is plagued and smitten by God and oppressed. He is to a certain degree also the house of Israel. Okay, and we accounted him as plagued, smitten by God and oppressed. This is it filled, and this is it when and we accounted him as plagued, and we accounted him as plagued, smitten by God and oppressed. So that includes the word anachnu and we. It's got a Mispah Gadol. Let's have a look what this is. It's got a regular of 943 and a Mispah Gadol of 1,503. 1,503 is give truth to Yaakov. Titain emeth li Yaakov. Okay, give truth to Yaakov. What truth? The truth. Od Yosef Chai. Yosef is still alive. And that's related to Mashiach ben Yosef. And I talked about that last lesson. Basically, Mashiach ben Yosef is a valid witness to the name of Yod-Heh-Wah-Weh above the letter of the Torah. Okay, he is alive in that he is a valid witness. The Christians are a valid witness to the name of Yod-Heh-Wah-Weh above the letter of the Torah. The Jews are a valid witness to the name of Yod-Heh-Wah-Weh within the letter of the Torah. But this is specifically related to the lost house of Yosef. Titain emeth li Yaakov, and the higher revelation of his name that they received, the revelation of the 13 attributes of mercy as revealed in the book of Micah. So that also comes to 2,446. That's connected to all this, and it's connected to this in particular. Okay, so absolutely incredible. So we've got this accusation, the Romans accusing the Jewish people of making images. Okay, and and that's connected to the whole concept of Cherubim, and it's also connected to the concept of he who sits in heaven laughs. Okay, let's go and have a look at the representation of the cherubim in the Holy Temple. So they're on the curtain, they're on top of the Ark of the Covenant, and they also decorate the walls. As we can see in the Talmud, they ripped off the walls some of these decorations of cherubim that were in there. This is this is Solomon's temple with all the menorahs in, I do believe. Oh, just let me bring myself back. Right, so this is images from the Temple Institute. So we've got here these massive olive wood cherubim. We've got the cherubim here. We've got cherubim on the walls. We've got the cherubim on the Holy Ark, and we've just seen that we've got the cherubim on the curtains. They're everywhere in the Beis Hamikdash, the entire centre of worship, and we've got cherubim wherever you look, all over the place. Why? And I hope you can appreciate that for people going into the Beis Hamikdash and just seeing all these incredible images of cherubim, how they can think, well, possibly the Jews are worshipping, man-made idols, man-made images. Okay. But there is, like I say, there is an argument. It's because this is not really the commandment. One of the arguments, I should say, the commandment to not make images is you can't make images on earth. Okay, but this is a different type of space in a way. The Holy Temple is not considered part of earth. It's really heaven on earth, and the commandment not to make certainly angelic images does not apply. So that's one of the arguments, something along those lines. You would have to look it up and read through it yourself. There's lots been said about it, but that's one of the, this is holy space. This is really classed as a part of heaven, and that commandment is not applicable. Okay. It's very interesting all the same, isn't it? Do they actually worship these, what these represent? They represent cherubim. Are they worshipping the intermediary, or are they actually worshipping the invisible God? And this is one of the things when you go into the Holy of Holies, this is what you see. I had a meditation about this the other day. Where is Yod-Heh-Wah-Weh in this? Well, he actually dwells on the mercy seat, which is above the cherubim, isn't it? But he can't be seen. Got to always remember that even though God represents himself in some way, like through the cherubim, through Israel, which is represented by one of these, it represents, the cherubim represent the divine embrace of God to Bnei Israel. But truly God cannot be seen. He can't be represented in any way, shape or form. He's the invisible God that dwells in what's called the mercy seat above the cherubim. Okay, so we've got to always remember, for everything that we see that's finite, we are ultimately worshipping that can't be seen, that is invisible, that is unknowable, that is infinite. Only that he desires to make an aspect of his infinite essence known to us will we truly ever know him, and we're in a process of being prepared for that. At this time he's completely and totally invisible. We worship an invisible God that uses powers and intermediaries like the forces of the cherubim, like the forces of Metatron, like the forces of Mashiach, to perform his will, or to represent him in some way, to represent some of that infinite power within finite reality without shattering it. Okay, so this is going back to that concept that I just keep repeating over and over again. It's very mysterious in a way. Now let's go and have a look at some other accusations, because in a way you can see you can see where the accusations come from when you're looking at these kinds of images, and you're also seeing in the Torah that you're not supposed to make any images. We just need to get that right, but we also need to know that we've got to see beyond physical reality to perceive that that's invisible. We've got to have eyes to see beyond the physical aspect of reality. That's part of our challenge. You know, physical reality veils the invisible God, but we've got to have eyes to see beyond that veil, to see into the spiritual realm, into the godly realm. We've got to be able to perceive God even though we see something that is not God. Okay, we see that's physical and God is invisible. So even through that we can see and perceive, we've got to see that. We've got to see beyond that into the realm of the invisible. We've got to see beyond to the invisible God that is hidden in that can be seen. It's all wonderful stuff. Right, now we get to the accusations that we find within Islam. Okay, so connect them Cherubim up to the concept of Metatron and all that I've talked about regarding Metatron previously. Is he worshipped or not? It says in Islam, Jews are accused of worshipping Ezra and Christians of worshipping Jesus. Let's go and have a look at this a little bit further. First of all, we're going to have a look at the concept of Metatron. This is what you find in the Metatron within Islamic scriptures. Okay, and this is a picture of Metatron. You know, I don't know whether he looks like a cherubim, but is a very significant angelic force even within Islam. Let's read about it. The earliest account of Metatron within Islamic scriptures might derive directly from the Quran itself. Uzair. Okay, this is part of the accusation against the Jews. Okay, but let's read this verse. According to Surah 9:30-31, venerated as a son of God by Jews is another name for the prophet Ezra, who was also identified with Metatron in the Merkava mysticism. Islamic heresiologists repeatedly accuse Jews for venerating an angel as a lesser god or an incarnation of God, especially when celebrating Rosh Hashanah. The name itself is attested early in Islam by Al-Kindi and Al-Masudi. We're going to be having a look at this surah, and it mentions about Uzair, which has been translated as Ezra, but there is room to believe when it's talking about Ezra within Islam that they're actually talking about Metatron. Okay, there is that connection because Ezra is identified with Metatron in the Merkava mysticism. That means the mysticism regarding the chariot. Okay, it's all interesting stuff. It says in a Druze text about cosmology, he is mentioned among the canonical archangels in Islamic traditions. Al-Suyati identifies him as the angel of the veil, so that's the curtain, and only he knows about that which lies beyond, i.e. beyond the veil of physicality into the realm of the invisible, into the realm of the invisible God. Only Metatron is able to perceive what's behind that veil. But we have got the capacity to be able to do that also, and we are being prepared in order to receive that that's beyond the veil, that is part of God's infinite essence, that unknowable infinite essence that he desires to make known to humanity, that's called the oneness. Okay, he's also frequently mentioned in the magical works by Ahmad al-Bunni, who describes Metatron as wearing a crown and a lance, probably constituting the staff of Moshe. So within Judaism is also called the staff of Moshe, or the rod of Elohim. Okay, that turns from a staff into a serpent, and this is the dual aspect of Metatron, isn't it? It represents us in a fallen state. He's the prince of the world, but he's also associated with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because on the one hand he's a staff, he's good, and then on the other hand is is a serpent, or is Michael, our advocate, on one hand, and then Satan, the accuser, on the other. It's got that dual aspect. He runs the system of reward and punishment. He is the executive arm of the attribute of justice. This is one of the ways through, one of the attributes through which Yod-Heh-Wawi reveals himself, and he connects that revelation up to the acts of man. And Metatron governs over that whole system. So men who act according to the will that they have been taught via the books that they have received, which are really an aspect of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, men who behave according to what they've been told to do are rewarded, and they reveal Yod-Heh-Wawi, Hashem, God, in this world. And then those who are contrary to the will of God or rebel, bring about a concealment of God and are punished. That's the system of reward and punishment, and this is connected to the attribute of justice. And Metatron, in one instance, is called the executive arm of justice. Okay. So who describes Metatron as wearing a crown and a lance, probably constituting the staff of Moshe. So you get that dual aspect, don't you? Reward, punishment, staff of Moshe that turns into a serpent and bites. In other magical practices, he is invoked to ward off evil jinn, devils, sorcerers, and other magical threats. Ibn Hazm mentions that Jews, although regarding Metatron as an angel, would celebrate Metatron as a lesser god 10 days each year. So these are the 10 days of awe. Why? Because you're in a state of judgment, aren't you? And if they are obviously seeing Metatron as the executive arm of justice, they have, they've worshipped him almost independently, because they're begging, aren't they, in the time, what's called the 10 days of awe, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, from the passing of the sentence to the judgment day to the passing, the sealing of the sentence on Yom Kippur. So there's the 10 days of awe in between. This is what it's talking about. So you really petitioning God to move from the side of judgment onto the side of mercy. But if Metatron represents that aspect of God in this world as the executive arm of his justice, the invisible God's justice, you can see where there's been some confusion, and where potentially Metatron has ended up being worshipped independently, like we begging the God of justice as we perceive him to write us in the book of life. Plus Metatron is the scribe, that writes you in the book of life. So there's all kinds of things like this as he become seen as something independent of God himself. And we've got to remember that these are just executive arms. They are only angels that cannot do anything other than the will of the invisible God. They represent the will of an invisible, unseen, unknowable God. They are not in any way, shape or form independent or have any power other than what is given to them by an invisible God. These are the way an invisible God, an infinite God, relates to finite creation and makes himself known. Okay, but it's not an independent power that should be worshipped or petitioned in any way, shape or form. We serve only an invisible God that uses forces that can be perceived, okay, such as Metatron, who's represented by the Cherubim. Right, so would celebrate Metatron as a lesser god 10 days each year. So I hope I've made it clear about that, where that accusation could come from. This is another accusation, by the way, but it's linked to an accusation that we find written in the Quran. We will get there. Probably a reference to Rosh Hashanah in connection with the Merkava mysticism that Metatron took part on the creation of the world. So like again, Metatron represents that executive arm of justice, but he's only serving an invisible God. He's not independent of that invisible God, and he can do nothing except what the invisible God tells him to do. He's only a servant serving an invisible God. It's not something independent that we should be petitioning and pleading with. Even though he is the executive arm, he's not independent from the invisible God. Only the invisible God's will gets done and executed. Metatron has no independence from that whatsoever. No independent power whatsoever. No independent will whatsoever. Nothing to worship, nothing to pray for. Okay, so we need to get that very clear, because there is confusion. There is confusion. So in Islam, Jews accused of worshipping Ezra, Christians worshipping Jesus. Down here we've got this. Professor Gordon Newby says Uzair is not Ezra but Metatron. I hope you can understand why there is a confusion between Ezra and Metatron, because Ezra is linked to the concept of Metatron to be found in the Merkava mysteries. This is the workings of the chariot. It's a branch of Kabbalah, Kabbalistic teachings, highly esoterical, mystical, secret teachings, okay, about the whole concept of the chariot for the divine presence. Okay, Metatron's obviously connected to that. Ezra's connected to that. And let's go and have a look, see if we can get to this quite quickly. So this was taken, I watched a video on theology called Blogging Theology. I really recommend you go and search this video out regarding the whole concept of this accusation to be found in the Quran. I thought it was very, very interesting. So this is what this commentator from Blogging Theology said. I read from A History of the Jews of Arabia from Ancient Times to Their Eclipse Under Islam by Gordon Darnell Newby, and he's reading pages 59 to 61. And I read from A History of the Jews of Arabia from, I've just repeated that, I think, haven't I? Sorry. So he's read from, I'll just go change that. Right, so we only need that little bit on then. So this is what we find in the Quran. I hope you can understand that this is quite complicated stuff even for me to understand, because there's a lot involved, and even these professors and scholars are trying to figure out, well, what does it actually mean? So this is fairly high level stuff, and I'm trying to simplify it as much as I possibly can based on what I know. It's a complicated phenomenon, but it's very, very interesting. Because when we look at these accusations, we can say, is there any truth in it? And if there is some truth in it, how do we rectify that problem then? We've got to look beyond all these forces, all the angelic forces, even Satan himself, no independent power. It can only do. Satan is an aspect of Metatron, is an aspect of the executive arm of justice. It's just the way Yod-Heh-Wah at this time chooses to reveal himself in this world until we are fully prepared to receive that he wants to receive. It's all done in a very hidden way though. All of humanity has been created. And in the meantime, we've got to make sure that we aren't worshipping something, or believing that these forces have some independent power. Satan can do nothing except from what the invisible God has instructed him and commanded him to do. He has no independent will whatsoever. Okay, as is Metatron, no independent will whatsoever, no independent power. So Quran 9:30, the Jews say Ezra Uzair is Allah's son. And the Christian says the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are merely verbal assertions in imitation of the saying of those unbelievers who preceded them. May Allah ruin them. How do they turn away from the truth? So the truth in terms of Islam is that there's only Allah. Allah is the only power. Okay, so they're very right in this. You know, they're not saying something wrong. And when they're looking at the Jews and their whole understanding of Metatron and this executive arm of justice, and maybe even offering prayers, and we're going to get to it, they did independently pray to Metatron. There is definitely some, what's the word for it? There is some grounds for, when the Quran was written, for believing there was a definite error. They had departed from the truth of worshipping an invisible God. They were seeing this power of Metatron as something independent. There is definitely grounds for this. We will come to that, and there's certainly grounds for the Muslims to look at Christians and think that Jesus is worshipped as something independent of God, an invisible God. There are grounds for it, because he's prayed to and he's worshipped as something independent from an invisible God. Okay, but is there error in that also? Okay. The Jews say Ezra, Uzair, is Allah's son, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are merely verbal assertions in imitation of the sayings of those unbelievers who preceded them. May Allah ruin them. How do they turn away from the truth? The truth that there's only one invisible God who's all powerful and nothing else beside him. So when the Quran says the Jews say Uzair is the son of God, it's saying they worship Metatron. So this is taken from this book, A History of the Jews of Arabia from Ancient Times to Their Eclipse under Islam. I think that would be quite an interesting book to get, actually. The Quran obviously does not approve. Judaism doesn't approve either, by the way. Judaism doesn't approve to this. But obviously at this time, going back to the time of the writing of the Quran, there was possibly some people that had departed from true Judaism. The Quran obviously does not approve, and some Jews didn't either. Jews called Karaites dismissed rabbinical Judaism as polytheistic because of this Metatron idea. When you understand, when you do search out the concept of Metatron to be found in Judaism, as you can see from my teachings, you've got to question the concept of it very, very seriously, because the idea of Metatron found within Judaism is very suspicious. Has it become idol worship? Is it something that's erroneous? Okay, and is Christianity, who according to the Vilna Gaon, Metatron and Mashiach ben Yosef are one. So as Christianity simply adopted the whole Metatronic delusion and turned it into a separate religion, just called it Mashiach ben Yosef or Yeshua HaNotzri. You know, there's something of the whole Metatron tradition to be found within Judaism that's hidden in Judaism. What is hidden in the heart of Judaism and kept secret, you know, the workings of the chariot, it's all secret. It's got only these secrets are revealed to the elites, but suddenly what was secret within Judaism has become external within Christianity through the concept of Yeshua HaMashiach and all the you know, the concepts found within Christianity, the main concepts of Christianity, are only what's found hidden in Judaism. The whole concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, to be found within Christianity, is hidden within. There's the one of the two. When you look at Yeshua's role to be found and expressed in the Gospels and the concept of Metatron, there's so many parallels. It's unbelievable. And that's why Vilna Gaon said the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef is Metatron. Okay, there's a great deal of truth in it, because this is connected to the concept of the upper light that didn't fall when Adam fell. This perfect upper light that didn't fall, both Metatron and the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef are connected to that. But has it become a problem that is cured for us by the words that are written in the Quran? Is what is written in the Quran the truth, or is what is understood about Metatron, the truth within Judaism, and what is understood about Mashiach ben Yosef, the truth within Christianity. Is the Jesus Christ of Christianity really the secret teachings of Metatron that were hidden in Judaism come to the surface? The same delusional understanding of the Messiah that is found in Judaism, is that just come out and found external expression within Christianity, and it's nothing more than idol worship? It's a question that needs to be answered. It needs to challenge it and get to the bottom of it. Is Jesus Christ to be found in Christianity the same error to be found at the heart of Judaism? The hidden heart of Judaism? Are they one and the same thing? Because if they are, we need to expose that error and get to the truth. What truth? That we only worship an invisible God and nothing else beside him. Okay? It's all very interesting. It's all very interesting. Were the Karaites right to point out that rabbinical Judaism was polytheistic, and is Christianity, as it is today, with the concept of Jesus Christ, is that the same phenomena found hidden within Judaism? I hope you're with me with that. It's quite a technical idea, but it's one I've thought about before. I've talked about it to rabbis. You know, when I've argued about rabbis who have pointed out all the flaws within Christianity, and I've said these flaws that are in Christianity that you're pointing out regarding Jesus Christ are only what's in Judaism. Go study about Metatron. I've had this argument with very high up Kabbalistic rabbis on this matter. It needs confronting and challenging, and you know, maybe the Muslims saw a problem that was very real, you know, and the Muslims took their faith in Yeshua from really an Ebionite influence, which came from James as opposed to came from Pauline Christianity. It's all very interesting stuff. I've mentioned it before. It's really interesting. So the Quran's polemic is directed against a medieval Jewish aberration rather than what you might find taught in Orthodox Jewish synagogue today. The Quran is not criticising Judaism as such, but taking the Jewish Karaite view over against the rabbinic view. My thing is, okay, so we're not allowed to criticise Judaism, are we? Because we're anti-Semitic when we do. That's the dreadful state that we've got in at this time. You can't criticise, you just get hounded for saying anything negative. But you know, Judaism at this time is under Erev Rav, which is the mixed multitude. It's in Erev Rav exile. The Torah of Moshe is descended into Erev Rav exile, and is this a consequence of it? You know, they wanted to worship, they were the ones that built the golden calf. They're wanting you to worship something other than an invisible God, okay, or the true Moshiach. They want you to worship what's equivalent to a golden calf. Is Metatron, the concept of Metatron found within Judaism, nothing more than a golden calf? Is the concept of Jesus Christ found within Pauline Christianity, is it simply Metatron dressed up with different names? I would suggest it is. Okay, what truth is in the concept of Metatron, and what do we have to avoid? What's the potential errors? Right, let's go and have a look at something else. It's all interesting, isn't it? It all starts to add up. In medieval rabbinic Judaism, it was assumed that in order to preserve that absolute unqualified unity of the Godhead, you had to presuppose there was a kind of secondary emanation of God that was the conscious personal God that created the world and to whom you could pray. A subordinate deity. Metatron was indeed the object of worship by many medieval Jews. Dr. Tim Winter says that at the Library of Cambridge University are many medieval Jewish manuscripts that contain prayers to Metatron. Okay, so there's also books by Gershon Shalom. I can't remember his name now. He wrote a book called right, this is the book that was talking about. Let me just scroll down so I hope you can see. I hope I'm not blocking it out. But Jewish Gnosticism, Merkava mysticism. So this is the whole concept of Metatron to be found within that, and the Talmudic tradition. I read this when I was on my holidays last year in the island of Mull, overlooking the island of Iona. Having a wonderful time, by the way, but I did read that book at that time, so I do know a little bit about the whole concept of some of these some of the concepts such as Metatron being Gnostic, what's called Gnostic. Right, let's go back to tie that into what I was saying. So it's this book here, if you can get hold of it. It's quite an interesting book, to be honest. Lots to think about. We're trying to find my copy of it, but I can't find my copy of it, so I wanted to hold it up, but I must have misplaced it somewhere. Never mind. So anyway, all interesting stuff. Now let's go and have a look at something else. So this is back to what the Quran says. By the way, there are other opinions that this Uzair is not Ezra, it's not Metatron, it's linked to Azariah in the book of Daniel, who was to be found in the to be found with one that looked like a son of God, when they were thrown into the furnace. It's all connected to Daniel. That's what I'm basically saying. That's another opinion that I think is quite reasonable to have that opinion. So the accusation could be false, but like I said, there's always some truth in it. There is always some truth in all false accusations. I recently I was looking at that verse in Daniel based on what I'd studied regarding this. There's lots of interesting things. There's lots of interesting things we need to start to reveal now. I haven't done a solid enough analysis of the whole concept of Azariah, but I did come across it and I thought, that sounds more likely that Uzair is Azariah, because of the fact that it mentions this concept of the Son of God, in being in the furnace with one that looked like a son of God. So I don't know. It's hard to find whether there's any. You've got to make lots of different. You've got to know a lot to try and unravel it all. Really, you really have to know a lot. So that's what we've got from Quran 9:30. Again, I've already read that. I'm not going to read that again. It says Muslims often get this wrong, and it's important to be aware of what it really says. Uzair is the son of God. What Jew believes Uzair is the son of God? So what if you were to ask a Jew today? Let me just finish reading it rather than saying my own stuff. I've never come across a Jew who believes that. Some Muslims say it is Ezra the scribe who arrogated to himself semi-divine prerogatives when he re-establishing the text of the Torah after the Babylonian exile. Okay, so actually within the Talmud itself, there is possibly indication that Ezra was held in such high regard, and not only that, the text that he then produced has been almost worshipped. There are reasons again to believe, when you go look in the Talmud that's describing the scribe Ezra, was he in some way worshipped on account of the fact that the Torah that we have now, the Torah was lost. So we've got the Ezra who was given this divine inspiration to remember the entire of the Torah after coming out of Babylonian exile. And not only that, the Targum is also traced back to Ezra the scribe, even though it's called the Onkelos. The convert is given the he is called the translator of the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation of the Torah. Okay, but it really goes back to Ezra the scribe. So he had some kind of divine inspiration that allowed him to recall or re-receive the entire of the Torah, and plus he had the divine authority, or whatever you want to call it, to change the text from Phoenician alphabet to Ashritic text, like what the Ashritic alphabet, the Ashritic form of the text, like what we've got now. So was he given? And then when you think about the way that this phenomena, the Torah that we now have, and the way even the alphabet itself to some degree is held in such divine regard, is Ezra in any way involved in that elevation up and beyond what it should be? Perhaps it's hard to know. And then there's evidence to suggest that there has been some changes within the Torah. The Masoretic text does not align with things like the Septuagint, and it doesn't align exactly to the Dead Sea Scrolls, although it almost does. But when you study the scriptures and the history of the scriptures, and there are certainly copies of the Torah that differ from the one that is used now, the Masoretic text. There's definite evidence of Torahs that predated the Masoretic text being different, So, when Ezra is responsible for the Torah that we have today, it's questionable, isn't it, if there has been some kind of formal reverence for him, to elevate him up to a status that allowed this particular scribe to give over this copy of the Torah to a people and for them to accept it. He obviously has a very, very, very highly regarded status. Did that cross over in some way? Was he elevated up to the level and considered at the level of a son of God? Don't know. And the Jew and the Muslims point out this is problematic. It's something to bear in mind. It needs a lot of research. It's quite complicated when you start looking at it. What have we actually got in this Quranic text? It opens a whole can of worms. It opens an incredible can of worms, really. And if you don't know, it's all right saying, "Oh, nobody worships Ezra." You need to know your Talmud, and you need to know the history, and you need to know actual history of the manuscripts that we've got in order to determine that for definite. I will say this about the concept of the Son of God. The Son of God is a phenomena. I've got a massive book this thick. Let me just show you. So this is a book. Hopefully you can see it. Ben, Sonship and Jewish Mysticism. Okay, it's an incredible text. So what's that telling you? The concept of son, including the concept of the Son of God, is absolutely and totally embodied in the teachings within the mystical teachings within Judaism, the hidden secret teachings. The concept of the Son of God is very, very evident. It's not just Christianity, and it's definitely linked to the concept of Metatron. Okay, so there's all kinds of, like I say, it's a can of worms. Whichever way you look at it, whichever way you interpret it, there's potential problems. Some Muslims say it is Ezra the scribe who arrogated to himself semi-divine prerogatives. I've read this already, haven't I? When he re-establishing the text of the Torah after the Babylonian exile. Okay. Us there, Ezra doesn't actually work if you look at the languages. The best explanation, which has been developed by many Western historians, including Professor Gordon Newbury in his book A History of the Jews of Arabia, is that it is not Ezra at all, it's about Metatron. Yes, Metatron, we've already gone through that, haven't we? This is just part of a dialogue that I picked up. Like I say, whichever way you look at it, there's problems. But with that, I will say shalom. I hope maybe I'll have to explore it in another lesson, especially that about Ezra. I've done an analysis, but like I say, I haven't deep dived into it, and I've certainly not done all the gematria, but I have done a lot. And it's really quite interesting when you start to piece all these jigsaw puzzles together. But the main take from all of this should be that we are not to worship a visible God or even a knowable God. We've got to look beyond what we're able to perceive and to know for definite that there is only Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, or there is only an invisible God, and everything that we are able to perceive on the surface is some type of agency representing that's invisible and unknowable and infinite in a finite knowable way. Okay, but we can't worship the thing in and of itself. All these different aspects, Metatron, Ezra, even Mashiach, they're not there to be worshipped. They are there to be representatives of an invisible God. Okay, so just got to bear that in mind, and like even when you see the Holy of Holies and Israel represented in it as an embrace and intertwined with God himself, you've got to understand we don't directly experience the invisible God. We experience an agent of the invisible God as is manifest through the Holy Sphere. It's all a bit complicated. I don't want to go there right now. There is got a lot more teachings regarding this concept of he who sits in heaven. He who sits in heaven laughs. There's more to come with the gematria, some really fantastic stuff related to Tisha B'Av, the whole building of the Beis Hamikdash, the whole destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, I should say, and then the rebuilding of that, and all the prophecy related to Yeshua, by the way. The true Yeshua, not necessarily the Jesus Christ of Christianity that might be some kind of idol worship that already existed within Judaism that just came out and created this Pauline phenomena. It simply could be. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Yeshua HaNotzri, the real historical man that is probably best represented in the Jamesian perspective, and that got introduced into Islam. And it's possibly a much more authentic way of understanding the concept of Mashiach, the true Mashiach, the true Yeshua HaNotzri, and how that is related to Tisha B'Av and things like that. So there's lots of interesting stuff that's coming up. Please subscribe and share, and thank you very much for listening.